That's nice.
Welcome to the Aransas County History Center. My name is Christy Linsley, and I'm the president of the Peacemakers by the Bay Quilt Guild. And if you are not aware of our guild, there's these little cards back there on by the sign-in table. We'd love for you to pick one up if you want. We meet the first Tuesday of every month, second Tuesday of every month at Peace Lutheran Church down on Market Street. And we have some open sow dates, we have programs at other times, and this is we work every other year in conjunction with the Aransas County History Center and put on a show that's here, exhibit. So we have a quilt that we donated to the History Center, and they're raffling tickets off here for $1 or $6 for $5. And the quilt was quilted by Kay Havman, and she's the one that did the one up on the wall there. So anyway, or she did the quilting, and we don't know who pieced it. It just showed up in our stuff. So we just will do that. We donate a lot of quilts to the community, back to the community. Today I'd like to introduce to you Sharon Wasney. Sharon is a member of our guild, and she hails from Missouri. Hannibal, Missouri, yeah. So, and she is a published author and a fantastic quilter and a great teacher, and she's going to tell us all about thread work today. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, first thing I have a quiz. So I'm going to just ask you to take one and take just a few minutes to look down through the questions. I will answer them as we go through, but take a look and challenge yourself and see if you know the answers right now before I start talking. And I think I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There's going to be, somebody's not going to get it.
So I'll pass it on. I'm not a quilter. I just like them. How are you doing? That's okay. Thank you.
Good excuse not to take a quilt. All right, quiz. Well, as I was preparing for this, and one of the reasons I volunteered to do this program is that I'm doing this program for my guild in August or October, or sometime later this fall, and I thought, oh, this will give me the push I need to get this stuff pulled together. And as I was looking, I thought this was an appropriate quote, especially for since we're doing this in the History Center. Jacqueline Carey, and I do not know what her background is, but I just want to credit her with this statement. The tapestry of history is woven of many threads. And so we all know what thread means to us in our quilting, and I thought that was an appropriate quote. When I was young and starting to sew, or my mother was teaching me to sew, I recall going into the J.C. Penney store, was our fabric store in that era, and they had those tubes, you know, they put their stuff in and it zoomed upstairs and stuff, and they had a limited amount of fabric, but they had fabric. And then there was this nice little thread cabinet over here to the side that had all these wonderful colors in them. And I have to say, I'm guessing it was probably Coates and Clark thread. I don't recall, but I just think that's probably what it was, because I think that's pretty much the basic thread that we had. Thread. Yeah, and I know it wasn't that, so I'm pretty sure it was Coates and Clark. But we would take in our fabric swatch and give it to the clerk, and she would go over and go down through and pick just exactly the right color. You think, Mimi?
I do. It's amazing.
So that was a nice experience, and I grew up that our thread always need to match. Now, I have to tell you that I have hardly any colors of thread except for the embroidery thread. But thread for sewing, I use totally neutral colors. Now I have a neutral gray, I have a neutral what I call blue gray, and a neutral green gray, and a neutral brown gray. But they're all very neutral, like this one tends to have a little bit more green in it. This is one of the threads that I'll talk about towards the end, one of the modern threads. But, so we no longer practice, I think, to that extent, exactly matching our threads. Is that accurate for most of you that are sewing? So let's step way back in history then, even before that, and learn a little bit about the history of thread. Obviously, ancient peoples did not have the sewing thread that we have. In fact, ancient peoples used what they had on hand. And so what was it that they had on hand to use thread? Well, they had the guts of animals, even the hides of animals that they used for thread. Not thread as we know it today, but that's how they did their construction. And we have, historians is probably not the right word, and I'm not sure if they're archaeologists, but those people that go back and uncover ruins, etc., we know that there was woven cloth clear back as far as 2000 BC, okay? We know that there was dyed cloth that far back, okay? So somehow they used some means to weave together things. Now, I'm not saying that was cotton or linen or whatever. I didn't really even delve into that. But as civilization advanced then, we started wanting things that looked a little bit different, a little more refined, and so that's the route that we have come. Now, I think one of the questions on your quiz is what was, and I think it might be the second, maybe the second question, what was the first thread that was actually manufactured? And I'm talking manufactured with machines. Would you guess what that is?
Silk.
Linen?
Silk.
Well, we've named them all but one.
Some.
Cotton. Actually, cotton was the first manufactured thread, but there's there are different sources that will say what was the first thread. If you were in the Eastern Asian area, silk was pretty much the thread of choice there. If you were in the European area, linen was pretty much the thread that was used, and some wools also, because they spun their wool, they beat the flax and twisted the fibers of that plant together too to make thread. So I'm not going to argue with anybody for a long time. Those are the basic threads that we have had: linen, silk, wool, and cotton. Cotton was the first one that was actually manufactured. Silk was, except in the Asian cultures, well, and I think even there too, silk was pretty much relegated to the very affluent, to the royalty, yes. And so they had no need for cotton because they weren't using it. And I think they might have used linen, but I don't know that I saw anything in my research as I was doing that. So BC, 1100 BC, we had silk and linen threads, okay? So let's fast forward to the manufacturing area where we actually started making what we would recognize today as thread. That happened in the late 1700s with that machine age that came along. And so one of your questions on your quiz is related to the spinning jenny. James Hargreaves invented the spinning jenny in 1764. Now, what was the spinning jenny? From your choices there, would anybody care to guess?
The apparatus.
The what?
The apparatus.
The apparatus. Correct. It wasn't the woman sitting there. Whatever other choices I put. And they had machines that did spin the fibers into thread. But what his spinning jenny did was increase the speed. So that was one of the first improvements that we had for manufacturing. We could get it made faster with the spinning jenny. That was in 1764. Then in 1769, only 5 years later, another man decided that there needed to be an improvement, and so he came up with a machine that not only spun it into the thread, but it also started back further and started carding and spinning and taking it to the thread that was available for sewing. And then in 1779, just a few years later, about 10 years later, Samuel Compton combined both of those into what was called the spinning mule. Where they came up with these names, I do not know. The research didn't say. So, by the early 1800s, we had manufactured thread. It was sold as a 3-ply or a 6-ply. Now, a ply is a strand of fiber, 3 of them twisted together would be 3-ply. 6 of them twisted together would be 6-ply. And then if they took 2 or more of those 6-ply threads and put them together, they called that cord. And I see in our cabinet here, there is a spool, it's a green spool with black thread on it, and it says Best 60 cord.
Neat.
So that's kind of neat to have that spool. So that was what they were calling that heavy thread. And probably that type of thread was used for very utilitarian garments, if used for garments at all. It might very well have been used for things like shoes and some of that type of thing. Okay. What they found out with that 3-ply and that 6-ply was that it still didn't work with an actual sewing machine, a domestic sewing machine. Now, the first sewing machine was invented around 1790 by an English person. And did you know that the first tailor to use a sewing machine was almost beaten to death by his tailor buddies because the sewing machine was going to do away with their job? And they literally almost beat him to death because he brought a sewing machine into the tailor shop so that he could get the job done faster. Okay? I think it's just interesting how it's nice to look back and what would it have been like in that time to live there and say, oh, this new invention, what is it going to do to my job? We're having some of those conversations now. Okay, so in 1790 was the first sewing machine, and that was over in Europe. The Clark Company of Thread, which is one I think we're familiar with, and I was looking at these spools here in the cabinet. Most of them are Coates and Clark thread, but the Clark Company was started by James Clark, and actually his brother also, and they were from Scotland, and they started their company in the 1750s, started taking in all this manufacturing information. So in the 1750s, Clark Company of Thread was established. Their relatives then opened a mill in America in the 1860s, around 1864 in New Jersey. Now, remember, Elias Howe invented the sewing machine for America, the American sewing machine. When? Does anybody know that date? 1846? Does that ring a bell? So in 1846, this American version of of what was called a practical sewing machine, that's what they called it, a practical sewing machine, was brought to America, or in America, in 1846. But this thread mill was started up in 1864. So almost 20 years later before we had our own thread. So our thread all came from Europe over here, even though we had a sewing machine. Okay. And actually, that one was not the earliest textile mill. It's known that there was a textile mill that eventually became Lily Thread. Have you heard of Lily Thread? That was actually begun in 1813 in North Carolina. And I couldn't find much information about that, and I probably could dig deeper than just looking on my phone. If I actually got onto the internet with my computer and had some time, I might be able to find a little bit more. But thread came on wooden spools, and again, you'll notice all the threads over here are all on wooden spools, and one of those is even a little bit newer thread and still on wooden spools. In 1820, and you know what? They were the first recyclers, because you took, when you used up all the thread on your wooden spool, you took it back to the mill and you had it rewound, refilled, okay? And you went back home and did it. And I'm guessing they didn't have a lot of color choice either. I'm just guessing that, but I didn't find anything about color. So, back in Scotland, James Coates was becoming very prominent with his thread business, and so in 1896, he merged with Clark. So Coates and Clark became a thread company, but they each still had their own thread. There was still Coates thread and Clark thread. It was not Coates and Clark until later. The silk and linen threads were considered to be too weak, too thick, and were left to more affluent citizens, and were still not relegated to thread making. Was still in the home, a domestic chore that was done. They were still spinning the wool and using that as an overall domestic chore that we had. Okay, one of the next questions on your, it may not be the next one, is related to mercerization. And again, I see one of these spools here that I can read says Coates and Clark mercerized sewing. And I remember seeing that word on the thread spools. You won't see that on the thread spools now. You don't know if it's mercerized. Actually, almost everything is. The reason that we mercerize thread is all of the above, right. That's why they mercerize thread, and that's a process of immersing the thread into a caustic soda solution, and it's still a process that used today. It's changed a lot, but it's still a process that is used today for the very properties that it gives to cotton thread. Okay, polyester thread, when did that become available?
60s.
Earlier, later?
I think early 60s.
It was around 1952 that we first had polyester thread. And then when cotton wrapped polyester thread came about in the 1960s. Okay, so we had polyester thread, and then we had cotton wrapped polyester thread, which was known as dual duty plus.
Oh.
Yeah, and so again, I'm looking at some of these, when we get done, you gotta come up and look at some of these spools, or if you have some old spools at home. And I don't see, it looks to me like, I can't see dual duty on any of those, but I wondered if that, the one on the one with red thread says heavy duty, it doesn't say dual duty. But that's how they identified their cotton wrapped polyester, was by calling it dual duty. Okay? So, by the 1970s, they had actually done away with wooden spools, and they had gone to plastic. Changes in our technology, which I found interesting when I was reading that, because now we're back to, there are people, thread companies manufacturing, and they're using wooden spools. So it's a constant change. Okay, so in the 70s we had polyester thread, we had cotton wrapped polyester thread, we had plastic spools, we were ready to sew. In the 50s, 60s, 70s, as sewing was kind of, home sewing in particular, was kind of enjoying a new boom, partly because of the baby boom. Moms were staying at home and making things. We had permanent press fabrics. We had hundreds of colors to choose from in our sewing. And then came knits. And our sewing machines didn't seem to like the knits.
I remember.
Particularly the double knits, the polyester double knits, and yet we had polyester thread. But our machines were being manufactured for those cotton threads, and the manufacturers had not changed. So some people said, oh, this thread isn't working. Well, the thread wasn't working because the machine was not geared for it. And so, because consumers complained, the sewing machine manufacturers got busy and said, ooh, maybe we need to do something different. Also, the needle manufacturers said, oh, maybe if we try a different needle. Did any of you sew on that stuff that was called Kiana? Do you remember that? It was used a lot, it was used, the only way I know it is actually through lingerie fabric, but I was working in a fabric store at the time, and the man that owned the shop said, oh, Sharon, this is the new miracle fabric, Kiana. A needle would not pierce that stuff. It wouldn't. We tried zigzag stitches. I was affiliated with, oh shoot, I can't think of the name. It's a branch of the Viking company in Minnesota. Anyway, they were tearing their hair out because they wanted to sell this Kiana fabric, but we didn't have sewing machines that could deal with it. Now, the fabric store I worked for, he also repaired machines and knew how the inner workings of the sewing machines and that type of thing. And we were literally cussing that stuff. And it's like, how are we gonna get rid of it? It didn't stay on the market for maybe 1 or 2 years. It didn't stay on the market for very long. Anyway, that was, and it was a nylon fabric, but it wasn't like the I'm gonna say traditional nylon tricot that we used for lingerie. It was well, it was more like a very, very fine double knit was what it felt like and what it looked like if you could kind of pull it apart, but it was a knit. Anyway, so here came the polyester nylon tricot knit, Kiana, and the machine industry then had some catching up to do, and then along came the desire to decorate with stitches, and we started seeing embroidery patterns that we could do with our machines, and all these decorative threads and rayons and metallics and different thicknesses. And once again, the machines were not geared for that. And so the sewing manufacturers, so this whole industry of quilting that we know is all woven with needles, thread, machines. They all have to go together. And I truly think at this point, they do collaborate much more, because as somebody comes out with a new thread, they're testing it on machines that women, that sewers are using, and so they're wanting to know, how is this going to work? And the sewing machine manufacturers want to know that they can supply us with a machine that will take those threads as well. So it's important, though, that we know our machines, and I've heard people say again and again, my machine doesn't like this particular brand of thread. My machine doesn't like this particular brand of thread. Actually, there is truth to that, because it's what is that manufacturer geared for, and what have they made their machine for, what consumer, and what that particular consumer niche wants, okay? So it may not work. And I know I have friends who swear by a certain brand. I happen to like a particular brand as well, but you do have to know your machine. And in Houston this fall, I listened in to Nancy Goldworthy, who is a thread expert. She worked in the sewing machine industry for 30 years, and then for the last 20 years, she's been a quilter. Part of that time was spent still in the sewing machine industry. But so interesting to listen to her talk about how in this day and age, it may not be as much the sewing machine as the needle that we're using. And so we have to get used to, and again, I can remember the first classes I taught when I got out of college, and when I suggested to the audience that they needed to change their machine, because we were sewing with double knits, that you need to change your needle in your machine after each garment. I can't remember when I last changed my needle. Then it might be a good idea to do it. And again, you needed to for sewing on that. And then we came out with universal needles and all kinds of needles, and I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Okay, back to thread. So what's important then when you're looking at thread, and I'm really gonna hone in now on some of the more decorative threads as well. But when we're looking at using decorative threads, which is one of the things that I love to do, you have to also know your machine, but you also have to have the right needle. It doesn't matter how good the thread company is that made the thread, if you aren't using the right needle. In fact, a lot of the thread companies now are even putting on the end of their spool, use this needle with it. We recommend this needle. What's important in looking at thread is the construction of the thread, the size of the thread, and the fiber content of the thread. So you need to get knowledgeable about those types of things. In terms of construction, there is the spun threads. That's where, if it's cotton is already short fibers. It's spun thread is usually combined cotton and polyester. Polyester comes out through a thing that looks like your shower head. It's called a spinneret. And it comes out in long strands of plastic, because that's what polyester is. And so they chop that up into short pieces, so then they can spin it together with the polyester. It's not like it's wrapped around, they are spun together, so they're all twisted together. So it's a cotton poly thread, okay? Then there's filament thread. The only natural filament is silk. Silk is the only natural filament fiber that is one long continuous strand. A lot of people think that silk is very fragile and you have to be very careful with it. One single strand may be fragile, but again, when they're making the thread, they're twisting several strands together, and so it actually ends up being a very strong thread. So you don't have to be afraid of using silk. If you're an applicator, particularly with cotton as opposed to wool, silk thread is really, really nice to use in applique, because it literally just melts into the fiber. You can just melt it. You can't see your stitches. Another type of construction is texturized. That would be the thread that we use in our sergers that has that kind of crimp to it, and then it stretches out as it goes through the serger. If you have a serger, that thread is treated with heat and with chemicals, and then it's crimped, and then it's spun onto the spools. And then there is laminate threads. Laminate threads are more the ones that may, they're like a flat piece. If you really look at them closely, they're more like a flat piece. They're not round. They're a flat piece. That's because it's several different layers of the fiber, and usually they're a synthetic, that have all been bonded together and then cut in very, very fine strips, okay? And then the ones that actually, I think one company anyway calls them, they're hologram threads. They have a real iridescence to them, and that's because of the way they're made. And then we have metallic threads. Metallic threads may or may not have actual metals in them. Again, it just depends. You need to become familiar with the brand that you like to use and find out about that. And by the way, every company has a website, and you can go on their website and find out information about their thread, and I'll give you a little bit more information on that in a minute. But metallic threads are actually polyester fibers that are wrapped around another synthetic fiber that may look like, it ends up, because of the way it's treated, it ends up looking like metallic. So there's not a lot of metallic threads that are actually metallic, but they may be. Okay, you can tell a good metallic when you unwind it from, this is not a metallic, but you can't even see that thread. This is actually a wool acrylic thread. But when you unwind a good metallic from the spool, it should not do that. It should not twist. A good quality metallic will just drop in a loop. Okay, so that's a way to know you're getting something that is a better quality, because metallics can be kind of finicky to use them. Okay, so that's construction. That's the different ways that our threads are made. Then for fibers, of course, we have cotton. We have rayon. I haven't talked too much about rayon. Rayon is actually a cellulose fiber. It's made from wood chips. And the reason we really like it for thread is that it takes the color beautifully. And as a dyer, I love dyeing with rayon because it takes the color beautifully. It is bright, I don't want to say shiny because they're not always shiny, but it really fits the dye well. However, rayon does maybe tend to fade a little bit more over time. The rayon thread may fade a little bit more, but it has that nice soft high sheen that I like a lot in some of my sewing. And then, then there's the polyester thread, we've talked about that. And then there's nylon thread. Nylon was actually the first man-made filament that we came out with, and if any of you were brave and tried those things at the beginning when they first came out, it was kind of like fishing line. I can see you smiling. It was kind of like, and I remember I had one of those spools, and my husband looked at it and he said, "Can I use that for my fishing line?" I said, "I don't know what the test weight is on it, but nylon degrades with heat, with sunlight, and with detergents, and so it's not the most ideal thread. It started out being something we wanted, something that we didn't have to match our threads, that we could sew with it and it would just blend in with whatever the background was. Then we came out with a polyester that did the same thing, and it's, in my opinion, much more desirable than the nylons. Again, I think there's probably some personal opinion there also. Then, what about size of thread? And thread is actually measured in two ways, but I'm only going to talk about the way we use it in our home sewing industry. The other way that we measure the size of thread is really in an industrial setting, and so I'm not going to go into that. But basically, size is based on weight. It's not how big around it is, which we can tell probably by that, but it's actually based on weight. And so the bigger the number, the smaller the thread, because it weighs more. So the bigger the number, the smaller the thread. So I brought along some threads. And this is my bowl of threads actually for one of the projects that I have along. And I'm using all of these threads. Well, I may have to make some color choices, but they're all in the same color mix. I'm going to pass this around as soon as I share with you. I like Wonderfill as a brand. I don't know where it's manufactured. I guess that it's being sold out of Canada. You have to get a distributor here in the United States or order it from Canada. But I love their names. There's Tutti and Fruity. And Tutti is their 50 weight thread, normal sewing thread that we would use, and Fruity is a little bit heavier, and I'm trying to think if it's 12. These are both, yeah, this is 12 weight. They're both Egyptian cotton. Egyptian cotton is valued because it's a longer staple than other cottons, okay? And so you'll see companies advertising, we use long staple Egyptian cotton for our thread. It probably still gets cut up and spun together with other threads. But anyway, I'm going to pass those two around so you can see. Those happen to be the same colorway. You can barely see the label, but the Tutti is the 50 weight normal, and then they make the Fruity, which is the heavier weight, the 12 weight. And actually, Tutti and Fruity are their variegated threads. And then they have a thread that's called Spaghetti. And I don't have their spaghetti one, but that's just a solid color. That's the name that they use for a solid color. And when you go to a quilt show, I don't have a brochure from, yes I do, here it is. When you go to a quilt show, stop at those booths and pick up their brochure, because they want you to know about their threads and how to use them. So here's all, I'm going to pass this around also so that you can see all the different types of threads that they use, and they just have a slightly different property. So again, from that going to one little cabinet that was not as big as this and picking out our thread to this is just one brand of thread. I happen to like Wonderfill, but Okay, so as we look at, I'm looking at these threads that I'm going to use. And so I also have some wool acrylic. And Wonderfil makes wool acrylic and Aurifil makes wool acrylic. Are there other brands? Do you know?
Yeah.
Name brands.
Well,
I wanted
Superior.
yesterday, yes. Do they make a wool acrylic? Maybe that's what I have instead.
Lana, Lana, they make a wool
But
acrylic.
that's,
And Madeira.
that's Wonderfil. A lot
Oh,
of it,
Madeira makes them.
yeah, I don't know about Madeiras.
They make one.
Do they?
Mhm.
Okay. Yesterday, Mimi gifted me this thread that is all wool.
Yeah.
And so this one, the blue, is a wool acrylic. You can sew with this on the machine, okay? Have you sewed with this on
You
the machine?
can't sew with that on the
Okay.
machine.
I'm guessing when it's totally wool that you probably couldn't, but just so you can see two different versions of that. And
This about
do you want to start this at the back?
Pretty, isn't it?
I'm gonna start this at the back so you can see as I'm passing around these threads. I wanna also show you, I did a test sample on using these threads that I'm passing around on this black felt so that you could see. The paper that's with it tells you, starts at the top and tells you the length of stitch that I used, the tension setting that I had, and what the fiber content or what kind of thread it was. So I started with wool on the top there, but you want to start that at the back and bring it forward. Okay, so we can sew with the Tutti and Frutti, which are a polyspun type of thread. They're polyester cotton. I don't happen to usually use cotton thread. I have cotton thread and I use it for certain things, but I don't go out and seek the same color in all my different types of, I mean, I go for the ones that I like to use. So this one, and you can see this is a very shiny, and it's a polyester, it says right on the label, and this comes from Superior Threads. And their brand is called Fantastico. And it's a 40 weight polyester. Now, when we see 50 weight and when we see 40 weight, sometimes it seems like there may not be a lot of difference. In fact, it may seem, I said the lower the number, the thinner
Bigger.
other way. The larger the number,
The small.
the smaller the thread. And yet this 40 weight seems smaller than the 50 weight. You have to remember there's also different plies. You can get 50 weight 2-ply, 50 weight 3-ply, and so you have to maybe think about that. A lot of times I go by look and feel. What does it look like? Does that look like the texture? Is it gonna give me the texture that I want? And then I check what the weight is. It doesn't say what ply, no, it doesn't, it's a spun polyester. Okay, and so then I have, this is a Sulky brand, and this is called a metallic. And you can see it kind of looks like a metallic. But when I thread this through the needle, it really does not separate out. Now, I have some threads that are metallics, and I didn't bring one of those, that actually separate out, and they're heck to get through the needle. But again, just seeing what the difference is.
They seem to come apart as you sew.
Yes, because when they're twisted together like that and they're coming apart before you ever put them through the needle, guess what's gonna happen when you're sewing? That doesn't mean you can't sew with them, because I do, and I like some of them. You probably are going to have a larger needle, one that has a larger hole in it, a longer hole in it, and what was the other thing I was gonna say? Oh, and you're going to have to sew slower. Okay, you're not gonna zip through it. But it doesn't mean that you can't do decorative threads. When you see that black piece of felt that's coming around, it doesn't mean that you can't use decorative threads. I specifically wanted to use a decorative stitch with decorative threads. you can do that. You just have to think about, do I need to change the tension?
Yeah.
And the best way to check your tension, first on the needle, the first check of your tension is when it goes through the needle, and you don't have to take the needle out of your sewing machine, but you've got your little case of needles there beside you or in your drawer or something. Take out the same size needle, thread your thread through it, hold your thread up and tip it. If the needle slides easily down the thread, that's the one you want, okay? If it does not slide down that needle, that is not the needle that you want for that thread. Yeah, that's a good tip.
Yeah.
Okay, now, what about pearl cotton? Because I like to do a lot of hand stitching, and I thought pearl cotton is only for hand stitching. No, you can use it. In fact, one of the samples, I think it's the bottom sample there, or next to the bottom maybe. I used number 8 pearl cotton. You cannot use number 5 pearl cotton. I don't think there's any machine that will take number 5 pearl cotton in the upper thread. You can use it in the bottom thread.
Really?
This is an example. This is at bobbin stitching. I put the thread in the bobbin, bypass the tension, and then sew. Now you can see you do not get a street stitch. There's no tension on it, so you get a little bit of a bubbly effect.
Yeah.
But it gives texture. I mean, that was my intent in doing, I knew that's what it would do, and so that's what I did. Use specifically for that. But I love when I found out that I could use number 8 pearl cotton in the machine. And it's, isn't it that kind of blue one there? I think it's the blue thread. I love how it looks in stitching. I love how it looks. You have to lengthen the stitch a bit,
Right there.
but oh my goodness, and I also did a decorative stitch with it.
Yeah.
What do you use in the bobbin then?
Okay, in the bobbin, when you're using, most of these threads that I've passed around, you're gonna have 50 weight in the bobbin, okay? Now, I know, especially my long armor says you have to use this, all the long armors I've used have said you have to have the same thread in the top as the bobbin. That's for long arm machines, okay? I don't know about
You
long
don't
arm.
have to, but we like it.
Okay.
Yeah.
You get a better result.
But on our home sewing machines, you can use different weights. For most of these decorative threads, 50 weight is what you should use. However, so if I'm using that pearl cotton, 50 weight has to be, and I don't think I ever changed. I think they all say that I used 50 weight in the bobbin for all of those. So you can look at the back side too, so you can see some of them do a little bit better. I didn't get the tension maybe changed quite as good as I should. But I just, once I discovered I can use this, oh my gosh, the possibilities that are opened up with this for decorative stitching.
Okay,
So,
okay, wait. How, do you put it on a spool, or do you wind it on something?
well,
Oh, okay.
Wonderfield comes on a
Okay,
spool.
because other ones
So, yeah,
don't.
this I can't.
No, but
and
you-
I've not,
I wonder if you could wind it on a spool.
You would probably have to hand wind it. I don't know, if you have one of the,
Yeah,
No,
I
things,
got a winder. Oh, that's,
it might unwind for you if you put it on there.
I know, I can't wait to get home now. It's like,
Okay.
Yeah, I never thought about using
All right,
that.
one other thing that you cannot use in your machine is embroidery floss, okay? It is several different strands, together. You cannot use that in your sewing machine. Okay, that is for hand sewing. However, and I forgot to pick it up, you can use some of those ribbon threads, like the very, very, very fine silk ribbon. You can use that in your machine. You just need to have the spool up in the upright position. My machine does both.
yeah.
You need to have the spool in the upright position, and the thread has to be coming off so that it's flat as it comes off, and you need to be careful about how you're threading it through everything, so as you go through the needle, you have kept it flat. I have not tried that, I'll be honest, I have not tried that.
Fascinating.
I would like to, there you go, Mimi,
Yeah.
try that.
I'll let them know.
Now, I will tell you, the thread that I use in my bobbin all the time is a 60 weight polyester. Yeah, this is Superior Bottom Line. That happens to be what I like. Superior has, again, you need to stop at those booths at the shows and ask their people. They know their thread and they know how it will work. They will even ask you, what machine do you have? They're very, Superior especially, is very knowledgeable to tell you about their thread. I use Bottom Line all the time in all of my sewing, except when I go to the decorative threads, and then I put the 50 weight, I use Orifil, but the 50 weight Orifil in my bobbin for that, because this will give me a finer seam. Now my reason for saying this is we were making the raffle quilt for the show here a couple years ago, and you know, everybody contributes and makes a block, and this one lady was saying, Sharon, this pattern just won't work, I can't get a 12.5-inch square. And so I said, well, okay, she said, I'm too frustrated, just take it, I can't do it. And so I took it back, and I was pretty sure I'd cut it accurately. And so I looked at her stitching, and her thread had to have been, I think it was at least a 40 weight thread in both the top and the bobbin, and I talked with her about this afterwards, and she said, well, that's what I always use on my machine. Well, that's well and good. If you're always using that, you're used to that, you can make your adjustments, but I didn't cut with that extra little bit for that. So when I just took apart her stitching, re-sewed it myself, same lines that she used, but the difference that the thread took up when you went to press the seams made all the difference. I got a 12.5-inch finished seam with 60 weight on the bottom, 50 weight on the top, as opposed to her 40 weight on the top and the bottom. It made that much difference.
Wow, yeah.
Interesting.
So, again, if you're going for accuracy and a particular size, you may want to think about investing in or looking into some of the even 60 weight. And now there's 80 weight. I mean, I didn't even get into the 80 weight and the 100 weight cotton and polyester, as well as the silk that's out there. And there's all kinds of threads, and I guess my bottom line is, I just want to encourage you to try them and not be afraid of them, and don't be like me and say, oh, I can't use that thread in my machine, and when I went to test, it's like, oh my gosh, I can, and look at these results, I love it. So, now I want to talk about the importance of tension, and I'm going to pass this around because I want you to look at this very critically. I'm going to tell you what to look for. I haven't corrected this. This is not done because it's a mistake, and I wanted to leave it in there so you can see the difference that tension makes. If you will look at up from this bottom thing right here, if you follow the bubble stitching up there, the tension is terrible. It is metallic thread. It does not look like metallic thread. Next to it is metallic thread with the tension correct. And I want you to see the difference in the color, because the metallic thread with the bubbles is pulled so tight that it doesn't even look like metallic. So just look at that real critically. Well, there's a place it does kind of look like metallic, but you'll see when you look at it. Look at it critically so that you can see how important tension is. You cannot leave your tension setting at the same. On my machine, it's 4.6. As soon as I put in any other weight of thread, I change my tension, usually at least down to 4 with metallics, and sometimes down to 2 with metallics. It depends. And that was free motion. Free motion and straight stitch makes a difference too. Okay. I want to show you another mistake. Well, you know, that's how we learn.
Yeah, that's how we learn.
So I left these mistakes in. Actually I've changed my whole thinking. I thought I wanted to use wool thread on this on this little wall hanging. And so I thought, well, I'm gonna hand stitch. So I hand stitched over here, I don't like that, so I'm gonna take it out. So I thought, well, I'm gonna try machine stitching. So I tried machine stitching with the wool acrylic thread over on this side. And it just doesn't have the look I want, but I want you to look at the back. And one, I adjusted the tension, and one, I needed to adjust the tension, so that you can see from the front, it may not look a lot different, but turn it over to the back and look at the difference. I'm gonna take it off. Okay. And then, I'm not gonna pass these around. You can, I'm just gonna lay them up here and you can look at them. Or, yeah. This one has metallic thread. This was all free motion done. Now, it's a little bit harder to free motion with metallic because you do have to move just a little bit slower. And so if you're used to free motioning fast, you may have to move a little bit slower. But I really like how this metallic turned out. Part of it is with a walking foot and part of it is with free motion. Metallic just doesn't really show up that much. When you're sewing with the larger threads, and this is just 12 weight, up here in this corner, and you'll see in the back, you cannot, when you're fastening your threads at the beginning or end of stitching, you need to leave them loose, pull them through to the back side, tie them and tuck them under, because this is too thick to sew in place, and which is what I do sometimes, especially for some of these small pieces, is just, I fix the stitch so it just stitches in one place. That works fine if you're using just regular thread, but with these heavier threads, you cannot do that, so you've got to have these threads, these threads, and I left some that I haven't gotten tucked back under, but that becomes kind of a pain.
Yeah, that's right. Now you could just,
Okay,
really,
good.
you can end it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I go forwards, back, and then just cut it.
I'll let you just take one of these to the back.
But is that the
One at a
cutter?
time. These two pieces, the quilting is done with a decorative stitch, so don't be afraid to think about quilting with a decorative stitch. Once you get your tension set correctly, it will look almost the same on the back as the front. So, and that one then is a decorative stitch. This one is a obvious, I don't know, like a feather stitch or chicken scratch or whatever you want to call it. And this one is just a wavy line, but it's done with the metallic. So you can see, again, just looking at the difference in what you get with the thread. And I'm not going to pass this one around, but if you want to help me hold it, I think they can see it. You can tell I have a lot of unfinished projects.
You're not alone.
Because I want to use a lot of decorative threads on this piece. In fact, all those threads that were in this bowl are going to be used on this piece. So up here, this is as far as I've gotten. This is the 12 weight thread. So I had to lengthen the stitch, reduce the tension, and then go ahead and do my, well, it is actually a decorative stitch that crosses each other as you're doing it. So again, you have to pull your threads to the back and tie them and hide them that way to do this, and so that has become a very tedious process. But you can kind of see how that decorative stitching stands out as opposed to what the regular quilting weight thread would have been. Thank you.
Did you, that was the what one, Sharon? The one with the 8?
That's 12.
12, okay.
No. Yes, that's 12.
Okay,
I have
the 12 on the machine now.
Yes,
Yeah,
12
okay.
on the machine.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the times when I bought a machine, I had an option of getting some piece that I didn't want, or this whole thing of 12 weight thread. So I took the 12 weight thread. So I have a lot of 12 weight thread, and I haven't been using it, so it's like, I need to get better at using that. Okay, so just a last reminder then. A last reminder, Orafil puts out a wonderful booklet. I was gonna copy this and I thought, I can't copy all this information. If you want it, either go to their website or take a picture with your phone of this. But it has a wonderful chart for what their thread is, what the uses are, and what kind of thread. The 80 weight, 50 weight, 40 weight, 28 weight, 12 weight floss, 12 weight wool, 40 weight cotton, 100 nylon. So it gives you all that information. This is Orafil. Orafil is one that I really like. For the rayon threads, Sulky puts out just a color chart. It talks just a little bit about it. But if you can get your hands on some of these, that's great. I think I already passed around the, that's the Wonderfield chart. And then Superior, because I spent so much money with them, he said, would you like one of these? And I said, yes, I would. And so the lady behind me said, are they free? And he said, well, yes. Through as they make a purchase. And she said, oh, okay, I'm gonna go buy some thread. So, that's better. But again, this is on their website, so you can look at it on the website. It even has a long arm reference guide, but the home machine guide, again, all the information is there. The best part of this booklet, you're all gonna wanna come up and take a picture of this. I think this is the best illustration I have ever seen about keeping straight how you need to adjust your tension. Come up, they use it like a teeter-totter type of thing.
Oh, cool.
And so it's a really good chart. You can't, I know you can't see it from back there. You just need to come up and take a picture of this because it's an excellent way to keep track. Do I need to change? Because so many people thought they had to change their bobbin tension. You don't mess with your bobbin tension. In fact, I still see a lot of people doing that, and all the thread people I have talked to said you shouldn't need to change. In fact, even the sewing machine people say you shouldn't have to change your bobbin tension. Don't mess with it. And I know people say, oh, buy an extra one and then turn the little screw and all that kind of stuff. And maybe that was true for the older machines. Maybe it's true, not as true for the newer machines. I'm not that into the sewing machine industry end of it, I guess. But I have never ever had to adjust my bobbin tension on any of the things that I have sewn. It's always the upper tension that you have to adjust. And that's the way the sewing machines are made, even if they're computer. And this also has a troubleshooting guide. This is, Superior puts out good product. And so, the bottom line is quality, quality, quality. Your sewing machines like quality thread, okay? And so, use the best quality that you can, and can you use old thread? Can you use this old thread here in your machine? Actually, here's another tip for you, to test it, to see, because people are always, they've inherited grandma's thread. Take off a strand, tie a knot in the center, and then grab a hold of both ends and pull. If it breaks, it's no good. If it doesn't break, you're good to use it, okay? The thread person, that Nancy Goldworthy, that has been in the sewing industry for 30 years, working with threads, said there's no reason you can't use old thread, okay? You just have to know what you're using. It's thicker, what's the purpose you want it for, and here's how you test it to see if it's gonna work. So, okay?
Wow.
Questions? Yes?
This is I don't know, it's a question anyway. Okay, when self started, first they were using it, little worms were spitting it.
Okay.
So obviously they don't have a bunch of little worms somewhere spitting all this soap.
Yes, they do. They have worm farms.
Really?
Yeah.
So how do they,
That's why it's expensive.
yeah, so how do
They have different processes for how they harvest, yes.
Yeah, they unwind it.
Oh, is that what, okay.
It was spun in a continuous process, it's unspun in a continuous process.
That's right, wow.
By hand, I take it.
No, it's soaked in, some solution, I don't even know.
No,
what
that's
it is.
all right.
But
I
it's
just-
so, it's soaked and softened and treated and, yeah, all kinds of processes. Actually, I'm really quite disappointed in my alma mater because, I took a lot of textile classes from Iowa State University and I contacted their textile department and said, in fact, I just had one of my, former 4-H members, graduated from there in the textiles department, and I said, give me the name of some of the professors, I don't know, they were all retired, all the ones I knew retired. And so she gave me a couple of names, and I asked her too, said, tell me what's a good resource for thread. I said that I have the 1999 version of the last textiles and clothing textbook that you used in your classes, so I know that's not up to date. Is there a new textbook? I have not gotten an answer. I'm really disappointed because that's been more than a month ago that I contacted them. So, but I'm still going to pursue that because I just want to get, I like having that information. I found it fascinating how thread is made, and when I learned about those spinnerets spitting out that polyester, I thought, isn't that neat? Just coming out of your shower head like that. Very teeny tiny, but anyway, so, other questions?
What does ONT stand for?
Oh, I forgot that, didn't I? What does ONT stand for? I looked on these spools to see if ONT was on there, and actually I think it's in the center where your spool goes through
Yeah.
and it gets punched.
Notable?
Our new thread, our nice thread.
Yeah, it's our new thread.
Our new thread,
They couldn't come
okay.
up with a name, so they said our new thread, ONT.
Oh,
Oh, that's right.
Isn't that funny?
Okay, I have a question. When I bought my sewing machine many years ago, they told me I should only use this one certain type of thread. And I didn't realize you could, it doesn't matter, does it really?
Well, I would say there
One
are,
brand is one
I
brand.
see people having trouble with thread on their machines. But mostly when I see people having trouble with thread on their machines, they have used what I would consider to be a little bit inferior product.
Well, this was not, that's the place I bought it at, they sold this particular type of thread. So I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but I mean, it is a good
Okay,
quality
I
thread.
have two favorite dealers of, I have a Viking machine. I have two favorite Viking dealers that I put a lot of faith in what they tell me. One of them sells Madeira thread, swears by it. The other one sells Orifil and swears by it.
This one sold Gutermann.
Gutermann is one of the most popular, Gutermann and Mettler are two of the most
Those are
popular
good.
brands of thread. Are they both made in Germany? One's in
Yeah, I
Italy
think-
and one's in Germany?
I think Gutermann.
They're made in Germany, but Gutermann actually has a factory in Mexico,
Ah.
because they grow cotton.
And see, I do not care for Gutermann thread. I just don't like the texture of it. I don't like the way it looks. I just haven't had good luck with what I wanna do with it.
Okay. I was just curious.
So I
because-
just don't buy it.
That's what I was
do buy
told.
Mettler.
Yeah, I have
Once in a
Mettler.
while when I want some colors, that if I'm actually sewing clothes, which I don't do very much anymore. I like Orifil. It does not lint up my machine. That's why I like it. It's long staple cotton and it does not lint up your machine. And some of the, what I call lesser threads, have a lot of lint. And you will notice quite a bit of difference in your sewing machine functioning when you have a really linty thread, because it gums up your, it just sloughs off lint.
Well,
really bad.
yeah, when we used to sew on the old machine that I bought
Yeah.
before, the
Yeah.
polyester did that, like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, it's probably spun polyester too.
Yeah,
And
I have a question on invisible thread. So, I'm putting like a 60 weight in the bobbin when I'm using it, and I use it like before I start even quilting, like to just stitch in the ditch. Do you have any opinion on using,
I don't like to use it, so I use it sometimes for stitching in the ditch, and I have 60 weight in my bobbin, and I still loosen the tension a little bit.
yeah?
And that's all I have
Because I
to
don't
do.
really, I don't care if it breaks because it's gonna, I'm quilting, but then I can take out all the pins.
Oh, I see, you're
Yeah.
using it more as a basting?
Yeah,
okay?
Yeah, but I've seen people use it quilting, and you know, if you don't have the tension right, it will just squeeze up. So it's,
Again,
but Superior makes a really
tension
good
is-
one.
tension, yes, that's the
Yeah.
word I use too, when
Yeah.
I use it. Tension is the key to many of the problems that we have with thread. You have to change the tension. That's why you want to take a picture of that chart. Because, and you need to always check on a sample, and I'm not always good to do it. Sometimes my sample is right along the edge
Yeah,
of my project, and oops, that didn't work. Rip that little bit out and start again. But you have to get comfortable changing the tension on your machine. I'm fortunate my machine always goes back to its default, I guess they would call it now, since it's a computerized machine, setting. And so I am not afraid to change. And I found, I just got a new Viking that I have at home. And I have to say, I like the good old topaz that I've had for however many years. I know what it likes. This new machine, when I went to start quilting, I just made the same settings that I had from my topaz. This is how I've always set my Viking machine for this tension setting. It did not make a good quilting stitch at all. The tension was way off. When I quilt, I mean, this is just an example. When I'm quilting with whatever project I'm working on, using normal threads, I set my tension down to 3.2 for quilting, as opposed to 4.6, which is the normal. And I just knew on my topaz, that's where I quilt. That's what works, always. So I did that on my new machine, 3.2. I had to go clear down to 2.0 to get a good tension with quilting. So again, you've got to not be afraid to deal with that tension. So.
True confessions, I have never changed the tension on the machine. I can remember back in home ec, and they said, don't touch the tension.
Yeah, we did. And that was before computerized machines.
Yeah, I know.
Too. But, yeah, you just have to not be afraid to do that and try it out. I think I was gonna say one other thing, but I can't remember what it was. Well, this was just this is still the same threads, but I'm using it on several different weights of fabric. This is 12 weight too. It's fruity or tooty or whichever one of them is. But this is a linen. I dye fabric, so this is a damask napkin here, and this is a dyed very tight weave cotton here. And so I brought this just so you could see. I did not change the tension from one fabric to the other, but that's another thing to think about, is what is the fabric you're using. When I was making those practice stitches on felt, and I was only using the one layer of felt, that's what works on felt. Okay, I will still have to check. I can't transfer, those tensions give me a starting place. But to come over to this, then I am going to still have to look at how is it reacting with these different threads. And so when I was doing this, I was wondering, I wonder what I'm going to have to do when I go from this damask linen napkin to this very tightly woven cotton. And I didn't do anything. I did increase the stitch length when I was stitching with it, because it's 12 weight. You just need to increase the stitch width, or stitch length. But anyway, so you're welcome to come up and look at any of those.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna put these two more Superior books over here. So I can look at those.
Oh, I know, and I have quilting quite a few anymore.
Sure, okay. Thank you.
Me too, bye-bye.
You know, we have a ramp out the back door.
Yeah, this is fine.
It's okay.
I am fine. Thank you so
I
much.
use threads on my needles. I have a Janome sewing machine, so I use their needles. Oh, I saw that recently on Google, it came up on Google.
I was 60 weight superior thing.
That was the one I had.
That makes sense when she's talking about lint, you know, there is certain threads that I have to clean more often.
And I have a little earring.
So I have just a little brush.
They told us to not blow on your machine, it's not good for it.
Yeah.
So I use my little earring. But then I had a assistant, and then I use girls' clothes, dresses, trying to really couch, I think it's wood posters, heavy, boat covers. I mean,
It was a machine.
well, they took. I have a terrible time how to use it. I could clear it, I could maintain everything. Well, all of a sudden one day, I broke out and
And you didn't.
I called the user and I just couldn't believe it when I was on. We don't even have those carts anymore, we don't have
I
that.
believe it.
So I'm very,
Oh,
my sister, and then I said,
see, I still have my original machine from like 40 years ago. It was a Janome. And then my new one is a rotary and sewing machine.
after that, I was
Oh, wow, yeah.